Polly Klaas, kidnapped and killed during a sleepover. Polly Klaas, 12, was taken from her home by a stranger during the night. She was then strangled and killed while her mother slept in the next room. Polly Klaas, then 12 years old, was having a sleepover on October 1st, 1993. She was with 2 other friends of the same age. Polly's mother was in the next room and felt unwell early in the evening. She asked the girls to keep quiet and to call her if they needed anything, and then fell asleep. The girls were watching movies and listening to music until around 10:30 p.m. A man entered the room. At first, the friends thought it was a joke, a kind of scare to amuse them, but the situation changed when they realized he was holding a knife. The man threatened the girls, saying that if they screamed, he would slit their throats, force them to sit on the floor, tied their hands, and gagged the 2 invited girls. Then he left carrying Polly in his arms, with the knife resting on her abdomen. The girls tried desperately to free themselves for the next 10 minutes, and when they finally managed to do so, they ran to Polly's mother's room and told her everything they had seen. The mother became desperate and called the police. Initially, based on the testimony of the 2 girls, the case was treated as a kidnapping and a composite sketch was drawn up. Testimonies from neighbors also revealed that that night, a man parked his car across the street from the victim's house and watched the movement for over an hour. Search for Polly Klaas. The next morning, a few hours after Polly disappeared, a babysitter who was leaving work noticed a car in a ditch inside her boss's house. The location was 32 kilometers from the Klaas residence, and the police were called to investigate the situation. 2 police officers were sent to the scene, which was in a rural area of Santa Rosa. When they arrived, they found Richard Allen Davis, who claimed to have lost control of the vehicle. According to the police, the man appeared to be a little dazed and had some pieces of grass and leaves in his hair and clothes. The vehicle was checked and everything seemed in order. The owner of the house was advised to file a report for trespassing, but he did not think it was necessary. Richard called a tow truck and was released. Progress in the investigation. On November 28th of the same year, the owner of the property decided to cut down some trees in the garden and came across a strange item. He gave the police a pair of pink children's leggings, commonly used for ballet practice. Forensic analysis was performed on the pants, and at one point, the police compared tissue and DNA samples that were compatible with another piece of the ballet set found in Polly Klaas's room. The police quickly made a connection between Richard and the kidnapping of the 12-year-old girl. In his testimony, the man agreed to provide a print of his hand, which perfectly matched the mark left on Polly's comforter on the day of the crime. Furthermore, he looked very similar to the description given by the victim's friends. For the next few days, Richard continued to deny everything. A thorough search was carried out on the rural property, involving great efforts by the local police and the FBI intelligence team. Nothing was found until the night of December 4th, when Richard confessed to the crime and agreed to take the police to the place where he had hidden Polly's body. In a shallow grave, about 1 kilometer from the rural property, the criminal buried the girl's body after strangling her. He refused to provide any further details or to explain the motive for the crime. The police believe that he planned everything days in advance and had even visited the place where he buried the body. A timeline published by FBI intelligence suggests that Polly was killed and buried shortly before the babysitter reported to the police that Richard's car was in a ditch. Who was Richard Allen Davis? Richard was born in San Francisco, California. He was the 3rd of 5 children and had a troubled childhood due to his parents' alcoholism. During his adolescence, he tortured and set fire to still living animals and began committing thefts that he described as a way to relieve any tension. He dropped out of high school in his sophomore year and some friends at the time believed that he murdered Marlene Voris, an 18-year-old classmate, during a party. A few weeks after Marlene's death, Davis was arrested for attempting to pawn stolen property. At the time, he confessed to a series of thefts in the La Honda area and served 6 months in county jail. 5 weeks after his release, on May 13, 1974, he was arrested for another theft. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for that episode, but was paroled after serving only 1 year. Trial and death row. After an intense trial, Richard was convicted on June 18, 1996, of first-degree murder of Polly Klaas and 4 aggravating circumstances: 2 robberies, 1 kidnapping, and 1 lewd act against a child. A jury in San Jose Superior Court decided that he should be sentenced to death. While sentencing was being carried out, Richard made obscene gestures toward Polly's family and said that she had told him that her father had raped her when she was a child, an allegation that was deemed false by the investigating team. In his closing remarks to the court, Davis made a bizarre comment saying, "I would also like to state for the record that the main reason I know I did not attempt any lewd acts that night was because of a statement the young lady made to me as I walked her to the ravine. Just don't do me like my father." This prompted Polly's father to attack Davis, which led to Mark Klaas being escorted out of the courtroom. He made these statements to Mark Klaas just to be malicious and offensive to a father who had just lost his daughter, Fryer said. "It is very easy for me to pass this sentence, given his disgusting behavior in this courtroom," the judge said in an interview. Richard is now 67 years old, and he continues to appeal the court's decision and awaits the execution of his sentence on death row. During his time in prison, he survived a drug overdose and attacks by other inmates. Little Polly Klaas' body was cremated, and her family scattered her ashes in the Pacific Ocean. Changes in American criminal law since the Polly Klaas case. When 12-year-old Polly Klaas was abducted by a stranger from her Northern California home on October 1, 1993, the effort to find her captured the attention of the world. When Polly's body was found 64 nights after her abduction, the outpouring of grief in her hometown and beyond was overwhelming. Why did Polly's case resonate so deeply with the nation and the world? Polly's mother, Eve Nickel, didn't know. She realized that not all families received this kind of support, but she hoped that what had been learned from Polly's case would help galvanize some other community in the future. If Polly's fate could change laws or inspire efforts to prevent child abuse, perhaps some good can come out of this horror, she thought. Indeed, the Klaas investigation would become a Hall of Fame case in the San Francisco division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For example, this case marked the FBI's first use of fluorescent powder and alternative light sources. These tools proved their worth in identifying a latent fingerprint on Polly's bunk bed frame, fibers connecting 4 crime scenes, and other evidence essential to the arrest and conviction of Richard Allen Davis, Polly's kidnapper and murderer, who was sentenced to death and currently resides on death row at San Quentin. The Klaas investigation was the first major investigation to be conducted by an evidence response team in the FBI. Based in the Bay Area, it demonstrated the effectiveness of local rapid response teams trained to process crime scenes, collect trace evidence, and work closely with the FBI laboratory. The evidence response team model was later adopted throughout the office. The Klaas case also marked the first time that an FBI profiler was integrated into an evidence response team. The profiler in the Polly case worked closely with the team to combine behavioral science with forensic science. This approach would be replicated in other high-profile cases, such as the kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart and the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. Communication between federal and local law enforcement agencies was streamlined and improved. Computers were placed in patrol cars, so officers could look up a suspect's prior arrests and convictions in real time. In 1996, the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children held the nation's first child forensic interview clinic. A new type of specialist emerged, child forensic interviewers. Although they work closely with law enforcement agencies, these interviewers are typically civilians trained through an internationally recognized, research-based curriculum developed by the National Children's Advocacy Center. Impact of the case. The Polly Klaas case had a profound impact on American society. Three strikes law, the national outcry generated by the crime, led to the passage of California's three strikes law, which imposes harsher penalties on repeat offenders. Child safety awareness. The case raised awareness of the importance of child safety and led to the implementation of child safety education programs in schools and communities. Foundation of foundations. The family of Polly Klaas founded the Polly Klaas Foundation, dedicated to preventing child abduction and supporting the families of crime victims. Defense appeals.
Richard Allen Davis, the man convicted of the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Polly Klaas, remains incarcerated. After being sentenced to death, Davis has filed numerous appeals over the years, seeking to overturn his sentence or obtain a new trial.
Davis remains on death row today, as the death penalty was suspended by California's governor in 2019, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. "It makes me so angry, you know. It really does," Mark Klaas, Polly's father, told Fox's Bay Area station KTVU. "You know, I'm still dealing with major anxieties 30 years later." Mark Klaas, Polly Klaas's father, and the Institute. Mark Klaas has spent the past 30 years advocating for families with missing children. In 1994, he founded Klaas Kids, an organization whose professional search and rescue team has helped find missing people for more than 1,500 families, according to the organization's website. Volunteers have lobbied for child protection and safety measures through government, law enforcement, and community activist circles. They have raised money for programs for at-risk youth and daycare operations. However, Mark Klaas recently announced that his organization will end its efforts in 2024. "I'm 74 years old, and I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. The foundation has been my therapy for 30 years, Klaas said. "Knowing that we're doing something to try to keep Polly's memory alive, to try to make sense of her untimely death, and to try to use all of that to protect other children." In the 10 years since Polly's murder, and the Klaas Foundation began working with other groups on accountability measures in law, government policies, and police protocols, violent crime in the U.S. and California has dropped by nearly half, Klaas said. Changes in law enforcement since Polly's murder include the launch of the Amber Alert in 2002 for missing or abducted children. The alert was created as a public engagement strategy across the board after several child abductions. The Klaas Kids Foundation was also instrumental in the passage of Megan's Law in 1995. The law requires sex offenders who are released from prison to register their location in a database. It also requires the California Department of Justice to notify the neighborhood where the sex offender plans to live. Polly's case also played a role in the 1994 enactment of California's three strikes law, a significant change in the law. The law imposes a state prison sentence of 25 years to life for a defendant who is convicted of a violent or serious felony and has at least 2 prior convictions for violent or serious crimes. Mark Klaas said he wants to take some time for himself, now focusing on the lasting memory of his daughter. The city of Petaluma honored Polly, who would have turned 42 this year, through the Polly Klaas Community Theater. She wanted to pursue acting. That's what she wanted to do, and she was really good at it, her father told KTVU. She was really discovering herself as a human.